Ram, let's start with this. It's because it's top of the mind, this Joseph Lelever book, which I'm delighted that you have dismissed out of hand as bizarre gossip.
Yeah, it's in a footnote in my book because it's not really an important thing.
But just tell me, how does a book, which is a kind of Stardust sort of thing, how does it get such critical reception and all? Is it because New York Times? Or
I don't want to talk about it, Vinod.
Achha.
I mean, it's not really, it's in a footnote and readers can read that footnote.
Now, what about these letters, these Kallenbach letters? Did you play any role in that?
Yes, I did, because I heard of them.
There are thousands?
There are thousands, there are hundreds. And I can tell you a story about that, which is in a sense linked to your previous remark. When I went to Israel and I heard of them, and I went to Israel and I looked through them, and they were incredibly rich. So our ambassador in Israel, whom you know, Naftet, first rate chap, he was convinced that they were important. I wrote a proposal, he forwarded it to the ministry, and the ministry was offering $100,000 for it, which was fair. And meanwhile, Lelever's book came out claiming Gandhi was gay, and the old lady who controlled the letters died,
the price went.
And her son made the price $1 million or more. So if the government of India had acted immediately on my recommendation and Navtej's recommendation, you and I would be paying less taxes today.
Oh, and did you?
But they're very interesting letters, because Kallenbach was really, in fact, in my view, what I've tried to do in this book is to talk about all Gandhi's friends, Kallenbach, Pollack, Pranjiv Mehta, this Gujarati merchant who supported him. And people only read Gandhi's letters. They don't read letters to Gandhi and about him. And people like Kallenbach, Pollack, Pranjiv Mehta, his circle of friends in South Africa, the way they sustained him, the way they inspired him, the way they criticized him when he was mistaken, I think that's really quite striking.
And could you use some of that material in the book?
There's lots and lots of that. So there are lots of. Pranjiv Mehta is a really interesting man.
And today that material lies in the archives?
Well, some lies in the archives, but some is in Ahmedabad, some is in South Africa, some is in England. So the material was gathered from all over the world.
I also went to South Africa, and I went to that station, Pietermaritzburg, and I saw it. And was that the defining? I mean, it is suggested that that's the defining moment in his life. But one other question before that. Did he get beaten up when he took the coach from there to Pretoria?
Not really. I mean, he got, that was an important incident, but it was not defining. Attenborough makes it defining in his film, and we read Attenborough's film. I think much more important than that was an account which in my book of a white mob attacking Gandhi in 1897. He's come to India to take his family back to South Africa, because
his second trip he's making.
And he's decided to make his home there. And Kasturba and children are going, and there's a rumor that Gandhi is bringing 3,000 Indians to emigrate into South Africa. And the white mob comes and beats him black and blue, and that incident is
physical beating.
Physical beating is described in my book, in vivid detail, and that is defining, because here is a man who's 26. In the train incident, he faced just one conductor who threw him out. Here there's a mob of thousands of white people abusing him, newspaper editorials calling him names, a traitor, calling him a money-grabbing lawyer and so on. And that is defining, because that's the first time he made such hostility. And he faces it with courage and equanimity. That's the first thing. That it's a demonstration of Gandhi's courage in the face of a mob attack, a violent mob attack. The other thing is, he's saved from the mob by a white couple. The police superintendent's wife.
They were watching.
No, the police superintendent's wife was just there. And she said, why are you attacking him? He's a good man, he's a well-known lawyer. Meanwhile, the commissioner attacks the police superintendent himself. And he brings up. So this convinces Gandhi that although the white mob is racist, there are still some decent English people. One of the great aspects of Gandhi's philosophy is that imperialism is bad, the British people are not necessarily bad. And this incident is very critical.
And you see that when he goes to in those pictures when the working class are just...
Absolutely, they adore him. Absolutely. So I think that is developed in South Africa.
And how does that relate into his philosophy from there?
Very much so, because I think South Africa is the place in which, he's an insular Bania. He grows up an insular Bania. If he had succeeded as a lawyer in Rajkot, he would have never been more than a Bania. But he fails in Rajkot, so he goes to South Africa. His first clients are Gujarati merchants. Then when he starts his satyagraha, and the Gujarati merchants back out because merchants are conservative people, as you know.
Yeah.
Then the Tamil radicals, the Tamil laborers come in.
Okay.
So he says, you know, Indians have
But how
Tamils.
did this philosophy of satyagraha develop in South Africa?
So it develops partly in opposition to these racist movements. But the important thing is that in this racist laws, but the important thing is in the course of this, he understands the diversity of India, of language, of caste, of religion, and also the fact that white people can be on your side.
Yeah.
So his kind of ecumenical, broad-minded, cosmopolitan, universalist worldview really emerges in South Africa. And I posed a question in my book that if he had never left Kathiawar, if he had succeeded as a lawyer in Rajkot, he would have simply been another Gujarati
idea
Mania.
that imperial power must be confronted by non-violence. Where does that?
Well, that comes from several sources. One, he had two mentors. One was a Jain scholar called Ramachandra Guha, who influenced him greatly and with whom he carried on a long correspondence. And Ramachandra Guha was also a proponent of religious tolerance and pluralism, and of course non-violence. And the other was Tolstoy. He read Tolstoy early, and Tolstoy talks about non-resistance to evil. He doesn't call it non-violence. But Tolstoy was an activist in Russia, encouraging young people not to enroll for the Tsar's army in the wars. So a conscientious objection comes from Tolstoy. And Gandhi, there's a long section on Gandhi's correspondence with Tolstoy, which is quite fascinating. Now, because Gandhi never read Anna Karenina or War and Peace. He never read a...
But he was very impressed with his farms and his social movement.
Exactly. He was impressed by his moral philosophy, by the fact that a rich aristocrat gave it all up to work with peasants, the fact that a sexual philanderer became a celibate, and also by his religious views. You know, the most important work of Tolstoy that influenced Gandhi is called "The Kingdom of God is Within You."
Yeah.
So it's inside you.
Yeah.
So even when he comes back to India and he attacks untouchability, and the Shankaracharya say, "Who the hell are you to attack untouchability?"
Yeah.
Gandhi says, "I'm a Hindu because it's inside me. This is how I feel." So Tolstoy is a major influence on Gandhi.
And the development of this philosophy starts from South Africa and then is fine-tuned when he comes back?
Well, that will be the subject of the sequel. Here I'm just looking at South Africa, and later on, of course, I will. But most of his ideas, his political ideas, his moral ideas, his spiritual ideas, were developed in South Africa.
I see. Now, around there is a charge of racism against him when he was in South Africa, that he didn't engage with the black movement. How valid is that charge?
It's not completely invalid, but it's not that he was a blind racist. Like any human being, Gandhi, as a young man, had the prejudices of his time. So when he first goes to South Africa, he sees the Africans as kafirs, as uncultivated kafirs. But the more he lives there, the more sympathy he acquires with them. So in my book you'll see, I talk about how he calls them uncivilized kafirs to begin with, but then he empathizes with their discrimination. He writes editorials about how badly they are treated, how they are thrown out of railway carriages as he had been. Then later on he says they will also adopt satyagraha to fight racial oppression. And he meets several important African leaders. The founder of the African National Congress, John Dubé, was an acquaintance of his. So he slowly evolves. And when he comes back to India, he follows events in South Africa.
But he was preoccupied with
with the Indians, of the Indians. In South Africa, Gandhi was a community leader. He was an activist for the Indian diaspora. It's much later that he becomes a more universal leader.
Now, one of the, again, Gandhi liked Muslims, if I can put it as crudely as that. And there were charges that he had a fondness for the community. Did this develop because he was called from India to South Africa by Gujarati Muslims, and his initial interaction was with these people, with these Boris? Or?
There were Memons, there were Boris, there were Surtis. And it's true that in South Africa, he developed his interest and understanding of Muslims. This, as I said, they sustained him, they supported him. But it was not, his so-called love for Muslims was not simply a payback for the fact that they'd helped him in his career. It was deeply felt moral philosophy. That his moral philosophy was every religion is partly true and partly false. And the only way to become a better Hindu is to engage with Christians and Muslims and correct your faults. So he was a religious pluralist. He was not a religious supremacist. He didn't believe Hindus are superior to Muslims or to Christians or to Jews. And that again emerges through his South African experience.
Gandhi always managed, in both in India and in South Africa, to collect white friends. Were they drawn to him, or was he consciously making sure that he was not just supported by the Indian community?
Both, I think both. One, he was clear that in any system of racial exploitation, not all the people exploiting you are bad. So he cultivated white friends, but they were also attracted to him. You know, one of the discoveries in my book is that his best friend, Henry Pollack. Henry Pollack's sister was madly in love with Gandhi.
Oh,
okay. Now, so she was like absolutely. Gandhi goes to London to lobby for the rights of Indians, and he spends 4 months, you know, talking to the Secretary of State, you know, chasing the imperialists to change their laws. And this Pollack says, "My sister, unmarried sister, will act as your secretary," and she's absolutely captivated by him, and she wants to follow him back to South Africa, where he has a wife and children and so on. And of course, Gandhi was a little embarrassed by it. He was a little flattered by it, as men tend to be, but he was also embarrassed by it because it wasn't reciprocated. But he was, lots of people found him appealing because of his character, his courage, and you know, his extraordinary commitment. Another important person in this book is his Jewish secretary, Sonia Schlesing, who was actually a feminist, who admired Gandhi but kept on chastising him for not recognizing the rights of women. So he had an uncanny capacity for making
very diverse
friendships. Yeah, he had an uncanny capacity for making friendships across boundaries, whether they be race or gender or religion or caste.
And he had something to say to all of them which interested them.
Yes, and I think he listened. I think the important thing is, unlike many politicians of his day and politicians of today, he listened. Gandhi was a good listener too. You know, he wasn't simply a demagogue giving wrong speeches.
One of the other things that said about Gandhi, that he was a great communicator, and that he was one of the first people who knew how to interest the media also in himself. This was through writing columns, or a journalist. He provided very good copy.
Yes, but he was also a great journalist. And again, that is where South Africa becomes important. Because he starts a journal called Indian Opinion. And he funds most of it, he writes quite a lot of it. And that's where it's in Indian Opinion that he practices and perfects his skills as a communicator in English and in Gujarati. And one of the striking things about Indian Opinion, Vinod, is that it's in 4 languages. You know, Tilak's Maratha came out in Marathi and English. Gandhi brings out a journal in Hindi, English, Gujarati and Tamil, catering to all sections of the population. So he knew that if you wanted to effectively communicate, you had to communicate in that person's mother tongue. English was not enough. You know, unlike the other elite nationalists like Nauroji and Gokhale.
So Gujarati
and Tamil, Hindi and English.
Who wrote the Tamil?
Well, the Tamil, he had a Tamil editor. He supervised English and Gujarati. He had a Hindi editor and a Tamil editor. Now, so this shows an extraordinary capacity for understanding
communication that is how you have
if you want to communicate to as wide a spectrum as possible, don't restrict yourself to English, because the Indian nationalists of the time, I said like Nauroji, Gokhale, just better they wrote in English, or sometimes they wrote in their mother tongue. So Tilak wrote in Marathi, but he said I'm going to produce it in 4 languages. So that paper, I have the masthead of the paper he produced. It's beautiful because one newspaper in 4 scripts. You know, it's.
This was done at the Phoenix Farm.
That was that's right. It was first started in Durban city, and then a few months after it was started, he shifted the printing press. He took it by bullock cart to Phoenix Farm. Yes, he took it by bullock cart to print it and dismantled it. 4 bullock carts went to Phoenix Farm. It was reassembled and it was run there. And of course, I've been to Phoenix Farm, and the shed is still there. The printing press is gone.
I went there also.
Yeah,
it's in a bad shape.
It's in a bad shape. Yeah.
Are we doing something to?
I think there's a Gandhi's granddaughter's trying to revive it, but you know it's.
I just wanted to ask you, in the South Africa of today, one hears reports of people attacking his farm, etc. Is he a sort of forgotten figure? Is he?
Not really. The farm was attacked in the 1980s, and it was attacked. That's Phoenix Farm. It was not attacked because people disliked Gandhi. It was because white Africans were displaced from Durban under the apartheid regime and went in search of land and overran the farm. So this was quarters, and a part of it was reclaimed. Gandhi today is remembered in South Africa as, I would say, an important leader of the second rank. You know, he started the Natal Indian Congress. That inspired the African National Congress. So he's remembered for having inspired the African movement. Many of the early leaders of the African National Congress, like Chief Albert Luthuli, who got the Nobel Prize, was a Gandhian and believed in non-violence. Mandela realized non-violence would not work, so took to armed struggle. But after liberating...
In prison, when he was read Gandhi in prison?
Well, he did read Gandhi, but after he admired Nehru, in fact, in some ways more than Gandhi. But after he came back, he realized that like Gandhi, you have to reconcile with the whites. So Gandhi is remembered as, in India, he is the father of the nation. In South Africa, he is one of many important leaders in the freedom struggle. Not of the status of Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, and so on. Joe Slovo, a little below. But he is remembered with affection. And they often tell you, I don't know whether you had this experience, but several South Africans told me, you gave us a lawyer, we gave you back a Mahatma. You must have heard that.
That was that station, I think, that they claimed it happened at that station.
Well, it happened over 20 years slowly, but he went as a lawyer and came back a Mahatma.
What did you think of Attenborough's film, in the South Africa portion? Does it romanticize?
Yeah, I think any film has to have a neat narrative line. The Attenborough film had to have a very simple plot line. Forget South Africa, even when you come to India, there's no Ambedkar. There's no Subhash Chandra Bose, because if you introduce Ambedkar and Subhash Chandra Bose, the narrative becomes too messy.
Complex,
In a book you can introduce that and show the disagreements. But it's a useful film for its time. It brought Gandhi back into public debate.
So you think the 15 years that he spent in South Africa, if he had not spent those 15 years in South Africa, he may not have been the person that he was when he came back?
Without question. In fact, there was a series of accidents. He failed as a lawyer in Rajkot in 1893, so he went to South Africa. In 1904, he offered Lord Milner, who was the Governor General, a compromise. He said, just assure Indians rights of property and practicing their profession. Lord Milner said, no, I'm going to kick out all these people. If Lord Milner had accepted his compromise in 1904, Gandhi would have come back to India because he was worried about his children's education. His children were young and he wanted to educate them in Gujarat. And if that compromise had been accepted in 1904, Gandhi would have never tried Satyagraha, would have never gone to jail. So there were a series of...
So we owe South Africa a big favor.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we owe Rajkot and the Bombay High Court a big favor because he's failing as a lawyer. He says, I used to doze in the High Court, I couldn't get briefs. He jokes about it.
Briefless lawyer.
Briefless lawyer. He jokes about it in his autobiography in the 1920s because then when you're famous, you can joke about your failures. But we owe, and we also, and there's something else I speculate in my book. His father dies. And after his father dies, he decides to go to London. And his uncle says, your father would have never allowed you to go because your father was totally opposed to crossing the Kala Pani. Your father was totally opposed to Englishmen wearing suits and drinking whiskey. So I will not allow you to go.
Undertaking from him?
No, then the mother takes an undertaking from him. But so he begs his mother, let me go. And she says, okay, here's the undertaking. But if the father had been alive, the chap would not even have gone to... So there are a series of accidents that allowed Gandhi to become what he was. So if the Bombay High Court had given him more clients, if Lord Milner had accepted his early compromise in 1904.
What kind of a lawyer was he in South Africa? Was he a successful lawyer?
Yes. He was a successful...
He was practicing in white courts.
He was a successful lawyer, Vinod, because he had a monopoly. Of course he was good. He was good. He was extremely hardworking. He spoke the language Gujarati. So for both the Hindu, so that helped. And his clients did not speak English, they spoke Gujarati. He was successful, he had a captive clientele, so he was good. But what discovery in my book is that in 1897, Gandhi was looking for a partner. He said the burden of representing all the Indians was too much. So he wrote to a Parsi to come out and join him, called Talyar Khan. And that chap said, sorry, I can't come. Then there are two letters written from Jinnah to Gandhi at the same time. Unfortunately, I only
had Jinnah?
Let me finish this. In Gandhi's logbook, in his office logbook, which I found in the Sabarmati ashram, in the logbook there are two letters. Received from M.A. Jinnah, letter 21st January 1897, 23rd March 1897. So here is the speculation. I know Gandhi is looking for a partner.
You don't have the letter. You
don't have the letters.
You just see the logbook.
Logbook. I know that Gandhi is looking for a partner to help him. I know that Jinnah at that time is struggling in Bombay. He also is the briefless lawyer in Bombay in 1897. I know that Jinnah is a Gujarati Muslim. And Gandhi is a Gujarati Hindu.
It's a good influence to draw.
It's a good influence to draw. So it's really, I can only draw the influence. I can't conclusively demonstrate it. But it's a fascinating thought. 1897, 50 years before Gandhi and Jinnah become the respective fathers of their divided nations, they almost forged a legal partnership in South Africa. It's a lovely, lovely thought.
Question on this part. How does he's not a very successful lawyer in Bombay High Court. How, when does he go to South Africa, develop as a successful lawyer? How does he become is it because he was no competition?
I think that's partly it, and partly also because there's
he
a
was
need
practicing in white courts, hostile white courts.
Yes, and often, but that's true. But the legal system is still just coming. The clients all speak Gujarati. They barely have a knowledge, or Hindi. They barely have a knowledge of English.
Did he win many cases? Huh? Did he win?
He win. Of course, he won cases, and of course, a lot of his work was not in the courts. A lot of his work was drafting memorials. Okay. To get me a permit. Okay. I want to cross from this territory to that territory. I want an extension of this lease. So that kind of language. So he appeared in court, but court appearances were not.
Last question on South Africa. There is some suggestion that he was some sort of domestic tyrant.
Yes.
Is that true?
That's true. That's true. And particularly with regard to his eldest son Harilal. And I have got some very fascinating correspondence, letters exchanged between them, because he had his children early, Vinod. Harilal was born when he was 18.
At the age of 24, 25, he took up abstinence vow, didn't he?
No. The abstinence vow was in 1906 when he was 35. Achha. But he had his first child when he was 18. So when he took the abstinence vow, when Gandhi was 36, he had a midlife crisis. Right. He said, like Tolstoy, I'll give up my practice, I'll live simply, I'll be a brahmachari. And while Gandhi was having his midlife crisis, his son was having his adolescent crisis. The son wanted to go to London to become a barrister, and Gandhi said, no, you can't go. And he treated his son really quite shamefully. And
particularly Harilal.
Particularly Harilal, Manilal also, but particularly Harilal. Kasturba too, but with Kasturba gradually they achieved a kind of accommodation, understanding. But Harilal was a tragedy. Harilal went 8 times to jail in South Africa.
On what charges?
In the Satyagraha, as part of the Satyagraha.
Okay.
He was a heroic Satyagrahi.
Oh.
So he joined his father's movement. He said, if you want me to sacrifice...
Not much is known about him.
No, and I found in the South African archives his fingerprints. Okay. Convict Harilal, 5 smudged fingers. Okay. So he went 8 times to jail. And then when the Satyagraha got over, he said, I want to educate myself. You have educated yourself like me. Gandhiji said, no, you must devote yourself to the service of the people.
Very old-fashioned, stern.
Yeah, exactly. He was a stern and completely not understanding. Also, Harilal fell in love with Gandhi's friend's daughter. Gandhi opposed it because, like an old-fashioned patriarch, Gandhi did not like arranged marriage. I will choose your partner. And so he was profoundly unsympathetic to Harilal. In many ways, despite his moral greatness, his colossal social and political achievements, like many great men, he was an indifferent...
There were 2 Gandhis, one at home.
That's it. He was an indifferent father, particularly to he later became better. I think with Ramdas and Devdas, his younger children, he was more understanding. So he learned from his mistakes. But Harilal was really treated abominably.
Okay. Just a couple of questions, last few questions. Can we just talk a little bit about contemporary politics?
Sure.
What do you make of Narendra Modi? Do you feel the surge for him from the ground?
I think there is a surge. And I think the surge is largely because of desperation. I think the weakness of Manmohan Singh and of course the reluctance of Rahul Gandhi to take a major role. I think, but also he is a profoundly compelling speaker.
So surge is by default?
No, that's part of it. Part of it is that he is a profoundly compelling speaker in Gujarati and in Hindi. So there is a surge. I have my personal reservations. You have some apprehensions about the prospect of him. Yes, and it's not to do with 2002. I think my reservations are to do with the fact that Ashish Nandi has also written about this. That he really has an authoritarian personality. It's all me, myself. I mean, as if
he's not a team player.
No, he doesn't. I'll give you one illustration. His coming out speech, his first major speech, which was to the Sriram College in Delhi. You will recall he talked about how the milk of Delhi comes from Gujarat. Now, a wise man would have said that there was a man called Verghese Kurian, And then he would have said, the communists in Kerala did not allow him to do his work.
Yeah.
So he came to Gujarat and in a hospitable soil he created this. But he can't do this, A, because possibly Kurian is a Christian and he doesn't want to say that. And secondly, he doesn't want to share credit with anyone.
And this Dehati Aura thing that he took with, went to town and then found.
He's just, I think he's just a...
How do your friend, you are Anantamurthy, says he will leave the country.
No, I will stay and fight him. I will stay and fight him. I will stay and fight him, and so will all of us. And in some ways, it's good if he becomes Prime Minister because in 9 months he will expose himself.
Acha. And the Gandhi family, you said the Congress must be rescued. The Congress is a great party, but must be rescued.
Yes, my fantasy is the BJP without the RSS and the Congress without the dynasty.
So we are headed for very strange times.
Yeah, strange and difficult times, but we'll come out of it. It may take 5, 10, 15 years, we'll come out of it.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Vinod.